Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Hope everyone's day is going so well. I'm super excited to kick off this programming. But before we dive in, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Jagan Vela. I'm the executive director of the International Game Developers Association, the IGDA. We're the world's largest nonprofit, member-driven professional association serving all game creators around the globe. Today, I am joined by our co-moderator, Erin Mahoney, the Assistant Director of Organizing for the Communications Workers of America. Erin, feel free to say hello and introduce yourself further.
Hi, yes, I'm really excited to be here and speak with workers from the US and around the world about organizing in the video game industry. I am the Assistant Director of Organizing at CWA, and as you know, we've always had tech and communication workers in our union, but several years ago, we launched CODE, the campaign to organize digital employees, and have successfully organized a lot of tech and video game workers, and are really excited to speak with workers today about more of that.
Absolutely, and we have a great lineup of panelists today, and we'll bring them on screen here in just a bit. However, I wanted to kind of frame, why it is we are having this conversation, and why today, and why now. Well, with IGDA, we have a very large reach of game developers around the world, over 34,000 industry professionals in our community. We have over 160 regional chapters and global special interest groups within the IGDA that serve local game development ecosystems or special initiatives that are important to developers. And as such, the IGDA is positioned to provide game developers with impactful programs and educational resources on critical industry topics such as worker empowerment and unionization. In partnership with Communications Workers of America and Uni Global Union, today's programming is really intended to educate game developers on the available opportunities to collectively organize and ensure safe and inclusive environments for themselves and for their colleagues. The need for this program arises due to the increased curiosity of unionization, what unionization means for developers around the globe, and a need to support developer awareness of these worker empowerment opportunities that support achieving a fulfilling and sustainable career. With that said, the IGDA Developer Satisfaction Survey, a survey that we do every other year, we just conducted the 2023 survey, and we'll be reporting about data around that soon. But in 2021, the data shows that developers are largely favorable for unions. And so today we're going to have a great panel discussion about that topics. But before that, I think it might be helpful to frame, what a union is. And so, Erin, I would love if you could just give us kind of like your brief overview of what unionization is in the context of games, and then we can bring on our panelists and get to some questions.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a union is essentially workers coming together for a voice on the job, right? And we've been seeing it in record numbers in the last several years. I think the data from Bloomberg in 2022 and 2023 was that workers were winning unions at a higher rate than ever before in the last 20 years. And we've seen it particularly in the tech and game industry. Like I said, my union, CWA, has organized over 4,000 workers in the tech and game industry. At places like Alphabet Workers, where workers have self-organized and are taking collective action, and in places where they're going for a more traditional model with collective bargaining rights, like at Sega and Tender Claws, who, by the way, just won their first tentative agreement today and won some really great, incredible standards for the video game industry. But a union is workers coming together and saying, we want to be equals. We want to be at the table with management. We want to, as a group, collectively decide what are some of the things we want to improve in our workplace, whether that be wages and benefits, or things like gender discrimination or other disparities, overtime and crunch, just sometimes even how our work is used, and looking at things like severance and job security, contracting out. All of these things are things that the workers are bargaining over at the table with management, and forming a union means that they get to come together and have a seat at that table and have a voice in the direction of their workplace, set standards for their industry, and really change change things for the better. I mean, the video game industry, I think all of us know, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's more profitable than the music and movie industry combined. And we see with those other two industries, they're highly unionized, right? And so they're able to set standards for the working conditions and make sure they get a piece of that profit. And we don't see that yet in video games. Although I do think, like you mentioned, Jake, that that's changing because of the high interest in organizing and the favorable perception of unions among this group. And also recently we've seen, I think one of the biggest barriers has been, the bosses and management being, fighting it tooth and nail. Like we've kind of seen it at Sega or TCG Player when workers have unionized. Those workers are putting up a good fight and we're going to win those fights. But other tech companies like Microsoft have actually thought that this might be the new direction for the industry, and that maybe it doesn't need to be adversarial, and they're actually making it easier for workers to organize instead of harder. And so, we're at the table with Microsoft. ZeniMax workers are there, discussing their working conditions, and that bargaining table is moving smoothly. It's night and day to some other employers. So I think that also is a shift in the industry, is potentially some of the breakthroughs at large tech and game companies, in addition with incredible worker interest and collective action and coming together in a really big way, in a moment that we're seeing globally for the labor movement, that lots of collective action, higher rates of unionization, and really just inspiring wins.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that amazing overview. I think that was a perfect way to frame the conversation moving forward when we bring our panelists up, and especially because of the sort of different ways we can approach unions. And you kind of mentioned it. One is it can be the way that it will be, and we can move forward and support worker empowerment. Or there will be times it's adversarial. And I think regardless of what we experience, we're going to learn so much on how to support game developers through these next few questions that we have for our panelists. But before that, to kind of further frame, this year has been particularly burdensome for game developers, especially those who have lost their jobs in massive layoffs, those who've continued to face misconduct in their workplace, those who continue to face crunch, or all of these issues that we just discussed, that unions could very much help resolve or support or reduce in a lot of ways. So I'm looking forward to kind of learning more about that as well. But yeah, so why don't we go ahead and bring in our amazing panelists, and we'll have them introduce themselves. So give us just a moment. Wonderful. And Antoine, why don't we start with you for the introductions?
Sure. So I'm Antoine B, and I'm a game designer at a small studio in France called Spiders, belonging to the international group Nacon. I've been active in the STJV for about 5 years now, mostly on communication, local organizing, and international relations. And well, that's it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And PE, how about you?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Pierre Marx. I'm a worker at Ubisoft's Paris studio. I'm an employee representative. I've been an employee representative for 4 years now. I've been the union local representative, and now I've passed on the torch to others to continue. At the STJV, I'm also part of the communications team, and I also take part in the legal defense team where we organize to help other workers who need our help.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Autumn, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing with CWA.
Sure. Hi, I'm Autumn Mitchell. I'm a QA tester at ZeniMax. I have been at ZeniMax for a little over 2 years. I think I'll be at 3 this summer. And I was an organizer in organizing our labor for our QA union. And currently I am serving on our bargaining committee, which is a team of folks that are workers in our union who are bargaining for our first contract with Microsoft and ZeniMax.
Amazing. Thank you. And then last but certainly not least, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing with SAG-AFTRA?
Sure. I am a voice actor and voice director in video games. I do other things as well, but games are my passion and have been for a long time. And I am the chair of the Interactive Negotiating Committee at SAG-AFTRA. So SAG-AFTRA is obviously a very large organization that represents a large number and diversity of performers. But I am heading up the committee specifically for the video game contract. And we are currently in bargaining and have been for over a year. So yes.
Amazing. And then why don't we go back to Antoine and PE? I would love to hear a little bit, even more, and especially about the legal support that you had mentioned, PE. But can you tell us even more about your union and what even interested you to start working with a union to begin with?
Vas-y, Antoine.
It's multifactorial. Basically, I wanted to get involved in politics at some level, and starting in the workplace just made sense, basically, because it's one of the easiest places to help people close to you who do the same thing, and also it seemed important to me that to get involved in organizing in video games, because video games is a really important medium which is used for nationalistic and far-right propaganda, basically, and so we have to change that. And for our union, it's well, the STJV is an independent union that's 6 years old now, which means it doesn't belong to any big famous confederation in France. And we started really small. There was like 20 to 30 people at the beginning, and now we are several hundreds, and we're basically winning all elections in workplaces in the video game industry in France for the last 2 years, I think.
And yeah, on my side, there is some similarity. I think just like Antoine, I came from a different background than video games. I worked at Capgemini actually before. And coming to video games meant two things. It meant doing a job that was a bit less soul-crushing than the previous one, but it also meant taking a 25% pay cut around that. And so to me, coming there was also realizing, wait a minute, this is a company that, in the case of Ubisoft, makes millions of dollars every year in profits. And we're still talking about measly salaries, people trying to make ends meet, especially in the Paris region, which is not very friendly to lower salaries. And also to build up a bit on the specificities of the union. I think what caught up with me was finding that the STJV was also doing unionization, both in a very traditional way, that is building from the ground up, trying to build up people, giving them tools to work at their workplace and create the relations and ultimately get the wins, but also trying to adapt that to our current situation where I think in many countries, and in France certainly, there was a crisis of representation of unions, sometimes being seen as an ambivalent figure. And I think the way we worked with being independent but being part of the social movement was very important for me. And one of the things that made me stick as well was that legal help that we provide. So I'm an active part of that. What we try to do is that we get people into We get people with us. We try to provide them some advice. We try to provide them some of our knowledge that we've shared between us, because it's a group of people who have built up things, who have built up knowledge of situations that sometimes reproduce between studios, because material codes are similar, and then bring them to defending themselves, sometimes in court if necessary. And I think that's also important, because in a way I've seen that judicial means have been taken away from people because they are costly, because they are very impressive to people. It may be a bit frightening actually to take your case to court. And one of the ways to fight that is to both provide them with examples, provide them with advice, and also help them build confidence in their case, basically.
Amazing. I really appreciate the tie-in, even back to Antoine's discussion point about how political it can be and how the politics of unionization have such strong implications on people's lives, not only in their workplace, but anytime you want to take an issue outside of the workplace, like a judicial proceeding or something. So thank you for that. Sarah, how about you? Tell us a little bit more about, your current activities and.
Oh, sure. Current activities or how I got started, whichever you would like.
Yeah, really, all of the above.
Okay. I'll try and keep it short and punchy. It was incremental for me. I did have a seed in my family history. My mother helped organize flight attendants with American Airlines in the 70s, which was like a really radical time to be doing that. So I think that was like the light that carried me through the kind of labor dark age that we've been in culturally, at least in the US, not in France, but in the US for a minute. So that was kind of the baseline there. And then it started for actors. It's sort of an interesting, I can't wait to kind of like find the common touch points and then differences here for actors versus developers in this conversation. But basically that, we often, it started with the work, the big games that you want to work on. You're like, I want to go to where the work is. And I think the paradigm shift that needs to happen is, as a community, we have an opportunity to bring the work to us, because when we set a boundary together as a community, then the terms and the space starts to shape around us. The work starts to shape around us. But it always starts for actors with like, I want to go to where the work is, and the rest will make sense. And then in that moment, there's also another, an actor paradigm shift that happens through organizing, where you go from seeing yourselves as competitors to seeing yourselves as a shared community. I mean, we're all trying to get jobs, and we, in games, sometimes we're isolated from each other. And so for me, when I started to take these union contracts, I was thinking, if I undercut this, or if I somehow try and circumvent it, I'm harming the ecosystem for the peers that I love and that I grew up idolizing. I mean, I grew up looking up to Jennifer Hale and wanting to be like her and whatever. And so if I'm thinking my contribution to the space is to make it harder for her to get what she deserves, that doesn't sit right with me. And so you start to see that, like, and I think that's something games teach, actually, is a systemic awareness and appreciation for how your actions contribute to a larger ecosystem. So I think those were the kind of ingredients that led me to like, oh, this is really important. I have to feed this. I have to cultivate this. Everything I do is either in cultivation or in opposition to this project. And it took a few steps, but I, had been working, I guess, before I even joined the committee, I was working to share information to create a low budget agreement, the first independent, like indie game agreement for actors, and just keeping the conversation open and collaborative, and making sure that actors and developers had the information they needed to use union contracts and protect actors. And then I ended up on the committee, and now I'm chair. I don't know. People ask me to do stuff. So yeah, that's how I got here.
You volunteer once
Yep.
People found that community-minded and driven force. They're like, yeah, we got to get Sarah on everything now.
Yeah, so now I do it to other people. You're precious. Stay, do more. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And then, Erin, I'll pass the mic over to you if you had any follow-up questions or want to lead into Autumn's.
Yeah, no, I mean, Sarah, I'm curious how you kind of foster that sense of community within your membership or your coworkers that you're working with. I know sometimes it can be a really difficult hurdle to get over when we're forming a union or trying to come up with demands at the bargaining table together, or other instances.
I mean, I think this is, and I'm cheating because I think this is just a basic organizing precept or concept, was one-on-one. I mean, and listening. I mean, it's so that you you use the relationships that you do have. We do admire each other. I believe that we, this generation of actors in this space, many of us are here because we wanted to be here specifically. We didn't fall sideways into games. We love games. We grew up playing them. We want to be here. We admire each other's work. We play the work. And so, I think that there's that basis of like mutual admiration and respect that's there. But yeah, it really just come down to, making time and safe spaces for conversations with folks, starting to connect the dots and seeing our shared experience, both in positively and negatively, and translating whatever frustrations you have into action you can take to make things better. So that, starting with things can be better, and let's imagine that for a minute, and then showing them, you can change this. If we do this, we have to do it together. If we do it alone, we fail. But if we do it together, then we can actually transform the space. So I think those are just kind of basic. There's unique challenges because we don't have a shop. We're not on a shop floor together, right? So there's that challenge there. But I think the how-to is basically the same principles that I'm guessing everyone here is applying. So.
Yeah, and in new ways, I think, with people working more and more remote. So I think those are good lessons to figure out. Autumn, do you want to talk a little bit about how you all decided to form a union and what the process was like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that a lot of people are not ignorant to the fact that QA for a very long time, for some reason, very specifically in the games industry, has sort of always been like bottom rung of the ladder in terms of like being respected, wages, perks, just, everybody else is up here, and QA, they just play games, which is very much not the case. It's a very highly technical job, and it is a lot of ability to be, autodidactic and to self-teach, to help one another. We work in teams. Sometimes we work isolated. It's a lot. It's a lot of work, and I think that decades of sort of being treated as bottom rung, knowing that you're working in such a highly profitable industry, just pushed us to a point where we were like, enough is enough. This culture is really broken. It needs to be fixed. And we've been trying to fix it on an individual basis. One of us is going to the boss and asking for change, going to the boss, asking for change, going to the boss, asking for change, rejected, rejected, rejected. And before you know it, the last option that you have is, oh, we could always just come together and unionize. Well, that's a lot. That's very risky. That's very intense. But I think you're right. I think that's the only way that we can make this happen. So we did that. We did exactly that. We organized, at first we organized in secret because in the United States, there is a lot of union busting. Corporations are generally not very accepting of unions. Union busting over here is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it works. And we were very pleasantly surprised as we were preparing to announce the fact that we were intending to unionize, that Microsoft had agreed to be neutral to our organizing, which was a very mind-blowing experience. The last thing that we expected was for a tech giant to be open to us exercising our rights. We thought for sure, this big tech company with their big dollars is definitely going to union bust, but they didn't. They allowed us to exercise our right to organize our labor and respected the democratic process. And we officially won and certified our union this January this year. So now we are, it's very exciting. So they're officially, since we've just absorbed another group of 77 people, we're sitting at 378 of us in QA across the United States. And we are currently in negotiations for our first contract. So there's about a half dozen of us sitting at the table right now negotiating with Microsoft and ZeniMax on the terms for our first contract. And it's really exciting. We're laying a lot of really awesome groundwork for hopefully what is the new standard, or at least stepping stones to what the new standard could be.
Right. And Autumn's being humble here. The ZeniMax folks are also helping to organize 5,000 workers at Activision Blizzard. Microsoft has agreed to the same, to apply the same agreement to them. And a lot of Autumn and her coworkers have been doing is talking to folks at Activision about what the process was like and what sorts of things they've been bargaining over and how to make it bigger and stronger, right? I mean, if there's thousands of people at the table, we're going to be able to win a lot more.
Absolutely.
I liked what you said a little bit about. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacob. Did you have some?
Oh no,
follow-up?
I was just going to say a quick follow-up question because you said two things that really stuck out to me. One is the union busting mechanisms that often threaten people's interest or actual availability to participate in collective organizing, but also the kind of like surprise that you and your team had with the neutrality agreement. So I was just going to ask a quick follow-up question. Do you feel like that because Microsoft has entered that neutrality agreement, that's going to set a precedent for other companies, or that will influence other companies to look to Microsoft and say, yeah, we should be neutral and let people organize? I'm just curious if you had any particular thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do think that it will absolutely influence companies to continue to do the right thing, which is to follow the law in the United States and to let people organize their labor if they choose to do so. I think it's already having that impact. And I think the way that we prove that that is the way to go is by showing that this process can not only be a painless process for companies, but can also be something that's beneficial to companies. Union labor is skilled labor. It's labor that encourages employee retention. It actually boosts up companies. It makes companies better. It makes productivity higher. It typically makes your products of a higher quality. People want to buy products that are created with union labor because they trust it. And yeah, I think that neutrality moving forward, it's certainly my hope, but I do think neutrality moving forward is not only going to set a new precedent and what people will choose to follow, but it's also just the right thing to do. And I think more and more people are being open to the idea that like, that an ethical standard is probably the move.
Thank you. Then I know so that was a great kind of introduction to kind of how everyone has been sort of engaged in their unionization efforts. The next sort of segment we'd love to cover is a little bit deeper dives into certain aspects of unionization. And I can take this first question. I would love to know, and we talked just briefly about it, I would love to know a little bit more about the myths that people should be aware of unionization and how you might correct any misconceptions that are spread, whether that's via media, union busting efforts, companies, etc. Yeah, so if Antoine, if you want to start with maybe your take on any common myths or misconceptions that our audience should be aware of, that'd be fantastic.
It might be a bit specific to France, but one of the myths we are trying to bust the most basically is people think that if they stand up to their boss and if they join a union, they will be blacklisted and so on. And at least in France, in fact it doesn't happen actually, because companies and bosses don't really have that power. We workers, we talk to each other a lot, we exchange information, but companies actually they are in competition with each other, so they don't in the end. That's the basic thing, because a lot of people ask whether the boss will know if they join the union or if they can stand up or something, and basically they can. I do. P is doing it too, and hundreds of people are doing it in our country, and then so it means it just works.
And just to touch upon that as well, one of the main points that also disprove that myth is to say the more we are to stand up, the less likely they can bring it down, because at some point they'll just ostracize themselves out of the industry. So it's also a point to say we already have people doing that and still having their jobs, still having their careers. And also we are lucky that we live in a country that has relatively protective laws for workers and especially for organizers. So in the contrary, actually, the more we give power to that and the less power the bosses can have to bring to try to break our movement.
Great. No, so that's really interesting about kind of what I'm hearing is like there's like a misconception of how much power and how effective that power is from coming together as a union. Sarah, any other thoughts on common myths or misconceptions that people should be aware of?
It's interesting. These are myths that I think are more external facing to folks who aren't, rather than to members or workers. But one is that unions are formed to protect workers who don't want to work, which is obviously for actors and I think game developers too, certainly not the case in this space. We love what we do very, very much, and in fact, everything we do to organize is to make that work sustainable, so we can afford, physically and financially to stay in the space. So that's one, is that it's about being lazy, which is absolutely not true. And then the other is that it's all about money, that it's just about, grabbing whatever money you can. And by far the majority of our packages, bargaining wise, are around rights and protections and workplace safety. I mean, there's just a world of quality of life that unions are there to protect and to preserve, beyond just wages, although those are certainly important. So those I think are the two big ones that I get when I talk to other people who aren't in the space or who don't have contact with this issue, that they have, but they're false. So.
No, thank you for those. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially like to me, the lazy myth like doesn't even make sense, because it's like you want to be doing your work, you want to be contributing, you want to be working together, you just want to be doing that in a great environment and not being taken advantage of. So yeah, really just that one kind of blows me away. But and then Autumn, did you have any other kind of myths or misconceptions that you wanted to bring up for the audience today?
Yeah. I think another thing that I have heard is that, unions don't work. This idea that unions don't work, I think, comes from people hearing sort of maybe stories on the internet. Maybe they hear like stories from, a relative or something like that about something that happened within their union that maybe that person wasn't happy with. Maybe that person feels like, they got the short stick or something like that. And the reality is, having a union is not like a magic word where everything is solved for you. Unionization it's you and your coworkers. It's you and your coworkers banding together to create effective change in your workplace and to rebuild structure at work. And if you're unhappy with your experience in unionization, get involved. Get involved in your community. I find that a lot of what I hear, my dad is a pilot and is in the pilots union. And he's got a good list of complaints, but a lot of that is because so much of their unionized workforce, they're not necessarily engaging in their community at work. They're just sort of, doing what they can. So to make ends meet, get the job done. And thankfully, their union is still doing things like, making safety precautions, making sure that pilots aren't flying 36 hours in a row and crashing into trees. So, it's still got its benefits. But yeah, I would say that's one that I hear a lot, is that unions don't work. But unions it's you and your colleagues. So if your union's not working, get to work.
Can I add an addendum onto that, if that's okay? Yeah, I think there's, people, and not to overly conflate unions with government, but they're both democratic instruments of self-determination and representation. And so many of us have grievances with how government works in our respective countries, but I think many of us are not yet willing to give up on democracy, right? And so the idea that a union, in principle is a failed project is not true. It's like that, I think both are actually essential, means for expressing and protecting yourself. But then both of them rely entirely on the degree of participation and engagement and information and awareness that goes into them. And so I think I have found it interesting in making these connections of like, oh yes, these are both things that just, they're tools you have to pick up and you have to use, but it's not that the tool is the mistake. And so that's something that I also share with folks who, because I mean, yeah, there are things that I with members who don't have an invested relationship with their union. I'm like, hey, I'm here trying to fix things. I'm here working with other people, staff and organizers and members to fix it and to keep it moving in the right direction. And we need your help to do that. But it's not that the project is the bad idea.
Yeah, thank you for adding that.
Totally. And I think along those lines, right, like a union is us coming together and having more power in bigger numbers. So the more of us that are active, right, the more power we're going to have. And that
Yes.
More people is obviously more power than just one person asking for something or letting the company do whatever they want without any pushback, right? So along those lines, let's talk a little bit about what unions can do and what they have done, and kind of dig a little bit deeper with you all about what your unions have done or what you want to see done as now that you all have become active in your union or formed a union. Specifically about artificial intelligence, I'm curious kind of how you all see AI affecting the industry and affecting your work, and also, where you think worker involvement or your union and in bargaining over this issue or doing collective action over this issue can affect that in terms of workers having more control over that or seeing the fruits of it, if there are fruits of that. How do we harness this for good, or how do we put safeguards on it? What's the plan? What's been done, and in what direction do you all think we all need to go in as a collective organized movement? Sarah, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I mean, I really wish I could be on this panel and have like spectacular good news that we got a deal, because we've been bargaining over AI for over a year, as I mentioned. And as far as how it affects us, me and my committee have been immersed in this technology and how it's going to affect our work and learning so that we can make informed proposals for a very long time. And we're seeing, the space begin to pick up this tool and use it, without really the partnership of actors. So we've been on, invested in this issue and trying to bargain for it for a long time. And we have it's part of our 3 core proposals, on the table right now. One is, a wage increase, and the other is physical safety for onset, movement performers. And the third is AI. And we have a strike authorization, vote with approved at 98.32%, I think, overwhelmingly in favor. And it's really coming down to this specific issue. But I'm excited to be here with CWA and learn more about this recent tentative agreement with Microsoft on AI, because we are not bargaining directly with Microsoft, but Activision Blizzard is this very big, important, significant acquisition that they've just completed. And so this willingness and openness to bargain for fairness and transparency, I'm seeing the same terms and principles in this pledge that we have on the table. I'm hoping that they will use their influential position to help settle this deal, with the worker protections that actors need to preserve, I think really existentially, our work in this space. And avoid a major strike that would disrupt not only their game productions, but those of many major game publishers and producers in our space. So I'm personally looking forward to hearing more about this deal. And again, congratulations to CWA on getting that out of them. So I wish I had better news, but I'm eager to hear more.
Great. Well, let's throw it to Autumn then. Let's hear more about this agreement at your table.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that we all need to just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that AI is very much sort of an unknown future, right? It's still very much in development in all different types of aspects. It's very broken in a lot of different ways, which also makes it sort of, it's exciting, but it's also risky. And like any technology advancement, any like major technology advancement, it does have an impact on jobs. And it will have an impact on jobs. I think it will touch every industry. And, I don't mean that even as an exaggeration. I think it absolutely will. The same is true for automation. So, we're playing with it right now, right? We've got folks who are using it right now, even in its moderately broken state. So I think that's important to acknowledge, for one, is that it will absolutely touch on every single job. But in our contract that we our TA that we just got on this proposal, our folks sort of realized that ZeniMax and Microsoft already had some existing policy language about the development and the deployment of AI, but that policy language didn't necessarily touch on the way that AI and automation impacts workforce and the way that it protects workers. So that's really what we wanted to secure. We were like, okay, let's work off of this policy, which in principle we agree with, but we need to make sure that the language says, deployment and development of AI in the way that it impacts the workforce is something that should always be able to be negotiated and something that should always be able to be bargained for. And also that it should follow the principles, which is fairness, that it treats people fairly. So, it's not a discriminatory AI system, reliable and safe. So it's not doing things like making decisions to dox people or out people or do anything that's really sketchy or dangerous. That it's private and secure, same sort of deal, that it respects people's privacy, that it doesn't, especially users, the people who use our products, we want to make sure that that's true as well, that it's transparent so that it's, it's easy to understand. It's not just some big algorithmic system that nobody gets. And also that it is, which I think is the most key element, is accountable. And accountable is basically that the people who are designing and deploying these products are ultimately accountable for the way that they operate. So for us, the goal was to make sure that this tooling benefits us rather than hurting us. And I think acknowledging that we cannot stop companies from wanting to use AI and automation, but what we can do is secure language that says, our jobs are protected. AI and automation are tools to make work more efficient. And, we continue to be able to bargain over impacts to our workforce. And that's what we got in the contract. And yeah, it's really exciting. We're really excited about it. And thankfully, our interest on our end as workers and the interests of the companies that we're working for were, I think, aligned ultimately in that way.
Amazing.
Great.
Yeah, that's such a hot topic right now, and it will continue to be for a while. And so, thank you for sharing that insight.
Can I add another tiny
Yeah,
little
of
addendum to
course.
that? The degree to which it does impact the workforce, again, across the board, SAG-AFTRA's determination and notification to the industry was that it's a mandatory subject of bargaining. I mean, that's how close to the core of how we do our work and how we're compensated for our work and how we're protected in our work this is. And so there is, at least when you have a union bargaining in this space and a bargaining body working across from you, our position is that they, and it's protected by labor law, that they can't just go ahead and skirt or try and circumvent the bargaining process around this issue. So, I mean, that's, I think, really important for folks to know, is that like when it cuts this close to what you're doing, you have the right to say, there's no way you can try and claim this or make a unilateral change to our working conditions and our wages in this way without bargaining with us. So there's that added layer of protection and driving back to the bargaining process that I hope folks know about.
That's great. And speaking of the bargaining
Yes, thank you for
process, as
highlighting
a
that, Sarah. It's
reminder.
really important.
Sorry. Yeah, thank
Go ahead,
you.
Jacob.
And just real quick, I just wanted to, as a reminder, going on to Sarah's comment, we are having a organizing workshop following this panel, and I've put the links in chat. I'll continue to do so throughout the panel for anyone who joins us, but please do register for that. And after the panel, we'll just transition over to that workshop. But Sarah, thanks for really capping that off, because like AI, there are so many other aspects and issues facing our industry. And so I want to bring it over to PE and Antoine real quick. I know that y'all work with students at the university level, from my understanding. So I'd love to know a little bit more about some of the work that you do to educate students about the industry and its various issues or emerging topics that they should know about. And can you tell us, does that affect views of collective action, unionization, industry culture? Yeah, I'll hand it over to y'all for that.
Well, quickly, after creating the union, basically we realized that one of the main thing we have to do is build a conscience of social class, that people have to realize they are workers, they're not before anything else. So video game schools and studies and universities are basically propaganda places for companies. They have their entry everywhere. They are giving money to universities to be represented and be advertised inside the curriculums. And so we realized we needed to get in touch with students. And we do that mostly by, whenever we can, we go and do presentations inside schools to basically teach about the basics of labor laws, and to explain what's the difference between being a freelancer, between being in a contractor, having a full-time or part-time contract, and so on and so on, because that's not something schools teach. They teach you how to get money to create your studio, but they never teach you how to find your place as a worker, basically. And we found it's really efficient. Students are really, really craving for such knowledge because they don't know how to enter the industry basically. And a lot of them are scammed with shitty contracts, not getting paid, and so on. And when we give them the basic tools to avoid such scams, then, well, basically they realize that they have to defend themselves, and the rest is history.
And just to add on to that point, a lot of the teachers at those schools are professionals from the industry, which makes sense in the way that they are people who have those skills, teaching those skills to students. But it also means that a lot of them may bring in some bad habits, some things that they have internalized as normal because they've only known that. So, for example, the practice of crunch, which is a lot of overtime in a short period, where they will just consider that to be normal, and even in some cases tell students that they should actually already crunch at school to get prepared for their work life. And so I think going to the students and trying to educate them kind of serves two goals at the same time. One of them is a very immediate one, which is, of course, we're trying to make them aware of what's wrong, giving them some tools, and maybe getting them to join also the movement and try to bolster our forces. But it also means for us that we are more efficient afterwards, because they will have better reflexes. They will protect themselves from the most obvious pitfalls. And so it's also a way to say, this is already our job, actually. It's already something that we would be doing in any way. And we also try to be as inclusive as possible in that term, in that we know that the industry is very fraught with a lot of different contract situations. So you have contractors, freelancers, various levels of smaller companies working for bigger companies who themselves work for an even bigger fish, etc. So you have some way, many situations are unique. So our way to consider things is to say our union is open to anyone who is working, is willing to work, or worked in the industry, from studies to retirement. And the idea is to include people who are currently not working, who are between contracts, etc. And it's also a way to say, don't feel disenfranchised because you just got fired from your job, for example, because some people may have that trouble. And it's also a way for us to say, we build that conscience from the get-go, and it's something that will follow you throughout your career.
Thank you. I think that's so important, and really can shift the culture in a big way. Just kind of touching back to one of the things that Jacob said when he opened about, the industry as a whole being in a difficult place, where we're seeing more layoffs, more precariousness in general in the tech industry and also in games. and also issues that have been coming up in the last several years, maybe more to a head, around diversity. Can you guys speak a little bit to what you think your union or your union efforts or collective action can do to address some of those issues in terms of layoffs or diversity or retention, and how it can improve or address those issues? Just bring it down to a little bit more of a concrete level for us. Maybe Autumn, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So unions, once you get into your contract negotiations, you can absolutely negotiate the terms of layoffs. You can negotiate alternatives to layoffs, talking to the company about what are options before you actually do something like this, and encouraging them to explore all those options before they do things like cause people to lose their jobs, it should be a major decision. It shouldn't be an easy thing that companies can do. It should be something that people have to think longer and harder about, because right now it doesn't really seem like that's the practice. Right now it seems like, well, things go up and things go down, so we have to cut some of you loose, and that's not fair. It's not fair to people who have spent sometimes decades at these companies, offering them all of their skills, all of their institutional knowledge. So exploring things like alternatives to layoffs, and also exploring severance language, exploring like, what does that look like if it does come to that? What are you gonna give these people? Is it gonna be some sort of rinky-dink little tiny baby package, or is it going to be a super awesome package because you and a bunch of your coworkers stood together and said, no, this is what we want and this is what we're getting, and you're going to have to be okay with it? So yeah, it's either let the company decide what they do with you, and let the company decide how they deal with you, or you have an opportunity at the table to negotiate those terms. I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we are talking about professional development stuff. We are talking about introducing DEI training at work, and we're able to actually have conversations with the people across the table and saying, hey, we really need this. This is an industry that's very much lacking in diversity. I think I ran the numbers for our office alone. It's something like 15% of us identify as women. That's pretty sad. The numbers for people of color is far lower. It's frankly, it's shameful in my opinion. And the company could do a lot better in ensuring that it's a more diverse and equitable place for people to work at. And that includes doing things like not just employee resource groups, but doing things like making a point to uplift those workers. And unions can be huge in that. They can communicate where those weak points are, and they can communicate ways that we need them to meet us. And you just can't do that on an individual level. We've tried. We've been trying for decades, and it's not as powerful. It's not as impactful. So yeah, those are a few things.
That's great. That's so concrete. Did anyone else have other things they wanted to add in here, Sarah or Antoine, before we move to some audience questions?
Just to that last piece, I think that one of the pieces, again, because people tend to, coming back to our myths about being focused on money, I think that folks may not be aware of the recourse, like the strength of the recourse options you have with a union. So when things go wrong, when a discriminatory practice is carried out, the fact that you don't have to sue someone with a lawyer with your own money. I mean, we have lawyers that your dues pay for that will file a claim on behalf of that entire production. Like, that's an incredible, and it goes to arbitration, not a lawsuit. Like, that is incredibly powerful and meaningful. And I think that's one of those things that needs to be shared, of when things go wrong, it's, the union catches you in a way that you are left alone, otherwise. So, obviously SAG-AFTRA does have a lot of, anti-discrimination language and practices and things like that. But then the question of no matter what the issue is, what happens when things go wrong? What happens when the employer tries to call your bluff and say, this might be in your contract or not, but we're going to do it anyway? What happens then? The union has these incredibly powerful tools to protect its workers. So I guess that's what I would add. Yeah,
I think that's great. I mean, I think also just thinking of the transparency that comes with the union too. I mean, you can do information requests, right, where we can make salaries transparent, so that they have to look at if there's discrepancies between pay, or pushing folks to put the range, the salary range, or having a wage scale, right? So that it's not just an individual manager who has bias, deciding whether or not you're getting an increase or what your salary should be. All of these things we're mentioning are things we can bargain over collectively. And there's also having just cause and having job security so you can take collective action in the workplace, right? I don't, Pierre, were you jumping in? And I know we have to move to audience questions.
Very quickly, but to build up on the point that Sarah made, I think what's important is that very concrete effect that you have is to say, don't just give us, don't just give us small talk. Don't just give us the nice things that we want to hear. We also want to be in control. We also want to make sure that you make good on your promises. We will make it costly if you don't, because that's ultimately the level of the level of power that we have to wield. And so what I see is that, for example, in terms of discriminations, it's both making them visible and how do we bring them down. So if there are any discriminations, how do we then adjust salaries or conditions, or because it's also about conditions, it's who gets promotions, for example, and stuff like that. And so I think it's very important to have a group that works like that. And it's very important to have a group that can bring people in and give them those tools that they can then use them to defend themselves. Because ultimately the goal of a union is not to defend people in their place. It's to bring them up, to give them the tools, give them the power, give them the security that they need to defend themselves.
Antoine, did you have any additional comments that you wanted to add?
Not really. P said everything, basically.
Perfect. No, I really appreciate all of that. I mean, we've gone from really kind of discussing the foundational aspects of what unionization is and means to all the way to the concrete implications of organizing and having that solidarity in one's workplace and its impact on our livelihood. So thank you all so much for the amazing responses to our questions. We do have some audience questions I wanted to get through very quickly, as we are running out of time before we move on to the organizer workshop portion of today's programming. So we'll go. I'll go in order, but real quick. Question for the panel: when looking to organize unions within the gaming industry, would it be more impactful to have one large game developer union, or have multiple unions dedicated to specific game dev niches within the industry? Who wants to take this one?
It's a tough one. I can begin to answer it, but
Sure.
I think it's very complex to answer because it will depend on local legislation. I think the situation in the US is very different from us. We can have a national union that then creates shop-specific sections, whereas in the US, you kind of do the reverse. You create shop-specific unions that themselves are part of a confederation, so to speak. So that's already a big difference. I know that also, depending on countries, there is the tendency to do something that is more industry-based or field of work-based. And so again, that can impact. I don't think one is better than the other. I would say the most important thing is to have cooperation. I think the worst case scenario is to have, be it two unions or several, that doesn't make any difference. The problem is infighting, and that means you have to have some solidarity and realize that you will not improve your conditions by bringing the others down, basically.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think that actually leads into a good segue into our next audience question. And that's kind of following the same line as the question above. How can game devs who are contract, freelancer, or who work for small indie companies organize themselves to join or create unions?
Well, we can speak. I can speak to that and maybe throw it to Autumn quickly. But we were, just because you work for a small indie developer or a contractor doesn't mean you don't have the same rights to organize as someone that works for a AAA studio. We work through the same process. People sign union cards, they form an organizing committee, they move to an election, they elect their coworkers to bargain at the table. And I think we've seen a recent success at ZeniMax where the contractors organized. And Autumn, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, I'd love to. I can't really speak for Canada or outside of North America, but I know for us in the United States, we actually just had a group of 77 contractors who they organized. They got organized. They organized their labor. They went through the democratic process. They certified a union, and then ultimately we were able to sort of have a chat with Microsoft and ZeniMax, and we were like, well, you can negotiate with them separately, or you could just bring them into the fold. And, you know, since we're already at the table, you may as well just do it all now, right? And they're like, yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. So we ended up sort of expanding, which was really fun, really cool. But the way that we actually tackled that was we had, you know, there's contractors, which is more like studios who are already have like established full-time employees who are like functioning as outsourced groups. And then you have contractors who are maybe working for like a headhunter company, who are maybe like on a payroll company. And in this case, these were folks who are working on a payroller. So they weren't necessarily working for a direct studio. So we were like, okay, organize your labor. That's great. And, you know, we'll see what happens after that. So our argument was like, well, with the way that your contractors are being treated right now at this headhunter company, it actually operates as a joint employer basis, which means that a joint employership is like, let's say you have a contractor working for, just as an example, a contractor working for a headhunter company. The terms of that person's working conditions are established by the company that has hired these headhunter people. So technically they are under a joint employer status, which is determined by people who have a lot more legal know-how than I do. But the way that I understand it from the NLRB is that it's essentially, you know, two companies are determining the working conditions of a single employee or many employees. So that was how we tackled it. We said, hey, you know, ZeniMax, you guys are as much as an employer as this headhunter company. So, you know, you have to take ownership of these people, and they ultimately agreed.
I would just
Thank you
add
so
that
much.
obviously the way that
Oh, go ahead.
SAG-AFTRA works is we are legally designated employees. That's like a basis for our ability to have our union, but we act obviously as folks who move from project to project. We don't just work on one project. And I think the glue and the foundation for however you do choose to organize is the shared experience. And so if you're able to draw that shared experience widely, or if it's based in location, however it's wherever it draws from, that is the strength of your leverage and the kind of how you should guide your organizing apparatus is what I would say.
And I will add also that basically anyone can help other workers, whatever the status, to understand their rights, defend themselves, just help each other, even like just socially getting together to support each other when it's tough. Ultimately, two workers helping each other is already a union, even without the legal structure behind it.
Awesome, thank you. And I think that leads us into another question that I wanted to highlight before we have to wrap up, and that is about the structure of unions. Sorry, it's covering everyone's face because it's a big question, but essentially, someone is interested in learning a little bit more about the structure, particularly what does the organizational structure of a union typically look like? Is it common to have a president and cabinet type structure with the treasurer? Is it a single representative negotiating on behalf of the whole union? It's better to have a committee or congress of leadership that bargains with the companies as a group. Loaded question take on the structure of your union and what that looks like. Sure, yeah.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Our structure is mostly horizontal, not by obsession, but because we think we need to get people involved. So that means that we have work groups like commissions that tackle certain topics. So for example, the legal aid is one, communications is another, and we are free to create others. So for example, we want to create, if we want to create a group on defining a policy for AI, we only need someone to bring up the topic and then bring people in, and then they are a group inside the union. The French law forces us to have a secretary and a treasurer, so we have those. They don't have specific privileges. They just exist because we have to designate them, and one of them goes to prison if something goes wrong. Not that it has happened yet, but never know. And outside of that, we have a committee that just makes sure that things are done in adherence to our statuses, because of course the goal is not because we define our rules together and we have to follow them. So I think the most important element is not to know exactly the exact structure, because it can depend on legal reasons, legal constraints, and it can also depend on the structure of your company, because if it's or your structure of your work. But it's mostly to find an organization that allows people to access information, access knowledge, and share that within themselves, so that you don't end up with the case where some people are knowledgeable people who will do stuff in your place, and you will just be some kind of an executant, I would say.
Yeah, I guess SAG-AFTRA is a large and old union that has like a lot of infrastructure, and so some of what you were saying, the task is we have members involved at all levels. I mean, obviously I'm a member, and everything I do is volunteer with the union. I'm not paid to do that, and I feel I mean our committee is made up of people who do this work, and we are very much the captains of our bargaining process. I think we're incredibly lucky to have the professionalized staff layer who full-time business reps, full-time organizers, full-time lawyers who are incredibly good at what they do. But it is essential for the ongoing health of the union, for membership to be activated and to take the task on themselves, and to take the sense of purpose and to steer that ship. And so there's that trade-off. Is you're like, yes, we have incredible tools at our disposal, and really passionate, hardworking people whose whole world is this, and they have their own union, by the way. But you can't allow that to kind of just lead into, like you were saying, of like, they'll take care of it, and and then our own voice or our own, real time understanding of what the working conditions are and what the needs are, loses presence. So there's trade-offs there's just trade-offs, but that's the overwhelming, that's the like guiding star.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Pete. And Autumn, did you have anything you wanted to add about CWA?
Yeah, so the way that it works for us is that we have our different locals, and we have treasurers and secretaries at our different locals, and within our bargaining units, we establish committees within our bargaining unit that's open to anyone who wants to volunteer at any time. We do host elections for things like bargaining committees, because we think it's important that people participate in the democratic process for electing committee members who are like negotiating for a contract that everybody's going to ultimately vote on. But I think something that I wanted to touch on that was in the question is, what's better? And I don't know that there's necessarily, I'm relatively new to this, so I'm not super sure, but I don't know that there's necessarily a better. I think what's important is that structure is established, and that also you continue to build onto that structure by rebuilding the community at work, by talking to your coworkers, figuring out where your weak points are, figuring out where your strong points are, lean into your strengths, and build on your weaknesses to make them stronger, and ultimately keep it open to everyone, right? Anybody at any point can get involved. Anyone at any point can contribute. Anybody at any point can do anything, really. No matter how, I hear a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really know if it's for me. I'm not an activist. I'm not the strong type. I don't want to stick my neck out there. I don't want to get in the way. People get really shy. And the reality is some of our shyest people, some of our most introverted people have contributed so much. They're doing things like typing up internal newsletters. They're doing things like, reaching out to some of our other really shy people and saying, hey, how do you feel about this thing? How are you doing? Also, I haven't heard from you in a bit. Like, I think that making sure that you continue to hold one another accountable in those structures and in those conversations and in that rebuilding is really, well, of course, and there is the whole treasury thing. I guess you wouldn't want to go to jail, but that's probably also important. But yes, the structure and the rebuilding the community at work, I think, is really the key here. I don't know that there's a better or worse.
Jagan, can I just add something quickly here?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question is such a great one to end on because it ties back to what many of the panelists have talked about, what the core of what a union is, which is a democracy, and it's democratic, right? And so whatever the structure at every level, people are voting on their leadership, right? And it's not something we can say about management. People don't elect their supervisor or elect their CEO. Like, this is an organization that's yours. You create it, no matter if you're joining a union that's been established for a long time, like SAG-AFTRA or CWA, or one that's been around in more recent incarnations, like STJV, right? It's something that you're joining, that you're participating in, and to just like break it down, right, at the local level, like you're voting on your union election, right, whether or not for your unit at ZeniMax to form a union, and then once you win your union, you're electing your coworkers to be at the bargaining table with some help from staff, right, that have done it before, but you're the ones at the table. You do a bargaining survey. Everybody gets to decide what they want. What are the priorities in the contract? And they might be different for different work groups. And then at the end of the day, even the TA that Autumn was talking about AI, that's not final until the members at ZeniMax, those 370 people, vote on that contract. And they can vote it up or they can vote it down. And if they vote it down, that elected bargaining committee goes back to the bargaining table to bargain something different. And then at a larger level, depending on how much you want to get involved, you can run for local leadership. You are now a member of that union. You could run to be the president. And if you don't like what the president's doing, you run and the members vote them out of office, right? And you can't say that about the corporate structure that we have in the US, and I'm sure in other countries too, although it's a little bit better outside of the US, but probably worse in different ways. So I just want to bring people back to that. No matter what structure we have, it's unions are a democratic structure. They're stronger the more you get involved, and it is what we make them, and we make them great. I think the panel here today has really like shown what all of the things we could win forming a union, and if we organize this industry in much bigger numbers, the power we'll have to change it and bring the standards up in a really significant way.
Thank you so much, Erin, for wrapping it up for all of us in that really positive outlook and approach. And I think you're absolutely right. With solidarity, especially among the knowledge and wisdom shared here today, I really think it's going to inspire others to consider aspects of unionization that they haven't previously considered, or to reevaluate anything that they may have misunderstood, or any myths or misconceptions that they may have held just for whatever reason. So a huge shout out and a huge thanks to each of our panelists, Sarah, PE, Antoine, Autumn. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. We had so many more questions than we could get to, so it sounds like we'll probably need to do this at least one other time. But Erin, thank you so much for moderating this amazing panel. And to everyone who is still tuning in, we do have an organizer workshop that we are transitioning to now. I'm putting that link in chat. It is on Zoom, and it does require a quick registration, just name and email. But go ahead and head on over to that Zoom call so we can facilitate the organizer workshop. We'll have 2 workshops going on at the same time in different breakout rooms, one for North America and one to talk specifically more about global union. So please do consider joining us for that. Again, thank you so much to panelists, and if you all have any quick last words, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we'll end right here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. And I will say the theme here has been, I think Antoine touched on it and Autumn touched on it, that, and I mean, obviously actors are part of this. Well, I feel like immense kinship with QA because actors are also told that we are not a meaningful part of the game making process, or we're ancillary or something. And so the solidarity across disciplines and say that every worker deserves, respect and sustainability in their craft, regardless of, the gatekeeping or the messaging around who makes games or who doesn't. I feel like the solidarity in the messaging here today has been really encouraging and lovely, and I hope it just continues to grow. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for being here and asking questions and so on.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for your time and the conversation. It's awesome. You're all very inspirational, and I hope that there were some things to take away from all this that maybe will inspire others to get organized. There's there's a lot of reason to do it. So.
Thank you all again. And let's go ahead and transition over to our workshop. I will be posting that link in chat right now. But again, thanks so much, everyone. We'll be in touch very soon.